For my critical issues topic, I chose to explore single versus mixed gender physical education classrooms. So, why did I choose this topic? So, I chose this topic because I attended a single gender undergraduate college, but had previously only attended coeducational institutions. And I was curious about the impact of single gender education on younger students. And more specifically, I became interested in physical education because in middle school, my public coeducational school had single sex physical education, but in high school, my school had coeducational PE. And I knew that personally, my experience in middle school PE was much better than my experience in high school. And I know that in high school, my effort levels decreased greatly. So, what I hoped to learn, knowing this information, was what are the benefits and drawbacks of single gender physical education classrooms? And is there one model, whether it's mixed or single, of physical education that research supports to be superior to the other? So, to find this out, I found three articles. The first article was a study that measured activity levels of girls in both single gender and mixed gender basketball games by using accelerometers, and it was published by Wallace et al. In 2020. The second article that I studied was a study that collected qualitative data by conducting a series of interviews with boys in PE classes that were more than 90% girls, and that was Lagerstedt et al. 2019. And the third article that I looked into was a study that measured the heart rates of boys and girls in single gender and mixed gender basketball games by using heart rate monitors. I would like to point out that these are two separate articles, the first and the third, which was interesting that they had similar concepts. The first article, if you'll notice, though, used accelerometers, and the third article used heart rate monitors. The first article only measured activity levels for girls, and the third study measured heart rates for boys and girls. So, some of the findings that I found I wanted to share with you included the fact that adolescent girls spent more time in moderate to vigorous physical activity and vigorous physical activity in a single gender session than in mixed gender sessions. This citation, this is from Wallace et al. 2020. Remember, this is the one that used an accelerometer, and the accelerometer noted that in a single gender session, girls were found to have more moderate to vigorous and vigorous physical activity than when they were in a mixed gender session. The next interesting piece of information that I found was that girls had a higher average heart rate during single sex settings than they did during coeducational settings. So this finding by Vargos et al. Really backs up what Wallace et al. Found a year previously, that the heart rate as well as the activity levels of girls are higher in single gender education settings. I also found that boys do not have a statistically significant difference in heart rate between single sex and co ed classes. So it didn't seem like boys had much of a physical difference, whether they were in a single sex or mixed sex setting in their physical education classes, which I found to be quite interesting. So while girls were shown to significantly improve their activity levels, boys didn't have much of a statistical difference. However, I did find that boys in girl dominated classes have the highest level of absence from PE classes. So, what that means is that when boys are in classes that are primarily female, they are more likely to miss gym. So, this obviously has negative consequences because students aren't getting exercise, which we all know has extremely important impacts on the human body. That's the entire point of gym classes, that it's really beneficial for our students. So while boys were able to, in gym class, have similar activity levels, whether they had an all male or mixed gender classroom, if there were more girls than boys, they were more likely to not go to class at all. So even if they were in class and performing well when they were there, their attendance levels were lower. Another fact that I found was that nearly 1/3 of ninth grade females dislike being in the same PE class as males. So this is more qualitative data, but I thought it was interesting and shouldn't be ignored that nearly 1/3 of ninth grade females don't want to be in coeducational classes. And then I have some information that surprised me. So, Wallace et al. Found that most adolescent girls stated that they believed their effort did not alter with the introduction of boys to the class. Now, we know from both the first and third articles that their physical activity levels did decrease when boys were involved in the class. However, their perception of effort did not decrease for girls. So, it's interesting to note that actual effort or actual activity level is not the same as perceived activity level. So while girls believed that they would perform and were performing at the same level in both environments, the heart rate monitor and accelerometers did not indicate that this was the case. I also thought it was interesting that male students did not have a statistically significant difference in heart rate between single sex and co-ed settings. So I thought that was another interesting finding. So that while there was a lot of statistical information about how girls had that difference, it was interesting that boys didn't have that difference. So this information surprised me because I expected one way or another for there to be a change because there had been such a change for females. However, there just was not that change for males. And keeping in mind the idea of effort and change, I was inspired to think back and reflect on what the text had said. Powell, 2019, our textbook for this course, mentioned that when boys fail, researchers often attribute it to lack of effort, but when girls fail, researchers often attribute to lack of ability. So it made me wonder about, in this context, when we're talking about specifically physical effort and ability, how research is going to view the way that girls and boys interact with these ideas of effort and ability in the gym class in a different way, and how we need to view that to keep this quote in our minds while we view that lack of ability or effort in our brains and think about how we are interpreting this data. So I thought this was a really great quote to kind of use to have this data and look at it through this lens. So with that in mind, my conclusion was this. I believe that the research suggests that single education, physical education settings are beneficial for female students. I think that their effort levels and their ability levels are both increased during these single sex education settings. I also believe that we can conclude that single sex educational settings are not harmful for male students. However, I believe that the research is inconclusive on whether or not the single sex setting is beneficial for male students. I don't necessarily know whether male students are achieving at a higher rate in a single sex setting. However, I think it is fair to say that it is certainly not harmful to them. And because the research suggests that the single sex education, physical education setting is so much better for female students than a co-educational one, I believe that it is worth doing more research into what the possibilities of single sex and physical education settings could look like in future school opportunities in America. And these are the references that I have cited throughout my presentation. Thank you so much for taking this time to watch my presentation, and I hope it's made you think about these topics in a new and interesting way.